Susan, it's great to see you. You've had a fabulous career in echo, contributed a tremendous amount, actually had a fabulous career in academic leadership, but we'll come to that in a second. How did you what was your first introduction to echocardiography?
Well, I did my medical school and residency at University of Rochester at Strong. And back in the day, it must have been, I was a medical student, it must have been 1979, 1979. Ray Gramiak and Navananda had a 2D echo machine. And you may not know this about me, Randy, but I tend to be a little cynical. And I remember standing in the back of the room and Dr. Nanda said, and this is the left atrium. And I said to my buddy, oh yeah, right, that's the left atrium. Like, it just looked like static on TV, you know. But by the time I did my cardiology fellowship at BU in '86, I already knew to ask, do you have color Doppler? I owned Feigenbaum's textbook, so I was already very into ultrasound.
What was it that intrigued you about it and made you want to have it be a focus of your career?
Well, I was a physics major in college, and so I loved cardiovascular physiology. That's how I wound up in cardiology. And then, yeah, I briefly toyed with interventional, but I had two little kids when I started my cardiology fellowship. They were 2 years old and 9 months old, and the interventional lifestyle just wasn't, at that time, at all conducive to work-life balance. And so I loved echo. I remember back at Strong, I made the a patient came in who looked like he had leukemia, and young guy, had huge pleural effusions. So he was very short of breath. We drained one, and I said to him, do you feel better? And he said, not at all. And so I re-examined him and made the discovery that he had a pericardial effusion because he had pulsus paradoxus. And I was outraged that the cardiology fellow on call, this must have been 1983, told me he didn't know how to use the echo machine and he couldn't come in and echo the kid. And so I was already very interested in emergency diagnosis and that kind of thing, and that's how.
I remember one of your articles, and I think when you were president, was about, you know, if I was having chest pain or had a problem at 5 a.m. on Friday afternoon, 5 p.m. on Friday afternoon, I want somebody with a point of care ultrasound
right.
or something to come. But I mean, echo to me was then and still is, it's just gaga, that you could put it down on your chest and you can, if you know what you're doing, you can figure it out and make a difference in people's lives. Let me ask you about technical developments that you recall in your career and how you were involved in some of those.
Well, when I went to Mass General to do my echo fellowship, John O'Shea was a fellow. He's from Australia, and he was the only one who knew how to do TEE. And you know, it was monoplane, TEE. You image things by really antiflexing or retroflexing. And Ned Wayman said, you better learn how to do this because John's leaving. So I did learn how to do it. We got kicked out of the operating room at Mass General after informing a surgeon that he had severe MR after a repair. And I loved TEE. So that then kind of took off. When I went to Penn, in 1992 as a junior faculty. It wasn't my first junior faculty position, but TEE really was integral to the emergency room, and we were the only ones who did it. So TEE call was very serious commitment. It was as bad as the interventionalists. We came in a lot. And the spiral CT scanner in the emergency room didn't happen until I think,
It
2005.
was the section city one.
Right. And so I came in all the time to do TEs, and I loved it. Then I got involved in interventional echo for mitral clips. Howie Herman and my junior colleague Frank Silvestri and I did a lot of imaging with the mitral clip company on pigs, and I got very interested in that. And then that led to an interest in intracardiac echo. Frank and I published a book about it. And so I've always enjoyed being in the cath lab, doing different kinds of things, and 3D was a natural progression. It was so much physics, it was just great.
You know, it's interesting when you're talking, I had a cardiac surgeon in the early days doing, went in the OR, and when I said the same thing, I said, you know, this guy's got bad MR still. And he said, turn the color off.
Yeah.
that was there.
Well, the Mass General Surgeon's comments were a little more colorful, but I don't think I can repeat them.
You can't repeat those. So you've had a fabulous career of going through, and really you're talking about the interventional, and that's in ORs or in cath labs or in ICE procedures, things. What are other important milestones in your own career that involved echo or doors that echo opened for your own career?
Well, certainly the ASE has been an important part of my professional life and my private life. I sat next to Richard Popp at a dinner when Ned Wayman invited him to Mass General, so late 80s. Nicest guy in the world. You know, I was the lowest rung of the very hierarchical lab at Mass General, and he was so nice to me. And it made a huge difference to me years later that when I won the Richard Popp Teaching Award.
You did. And which
it was just so wonderful.
Having known, you know, Rich was my mentor, and having known Rich, you've described him well, and it does mean a lot that you've got the Richard Popp Award. So it's a testament to your capabilities and everything else. How did you first get involved with the American Society of Echo?
Well, in Ned Wayman's lab, it was not an optional at all. We submitted abstracts. I went to a meeting in Washington, D.C. in the very early years. And I will say that my first impression of the ASE, and don't take offense at this, it was a bunch of older white men giving each other awards. And I remember putting my hands on my chin and thinking, I will never be part of this. And ASE proved me wrong. It was as opposed, I think, to a number of societies and a number of cardiologists. The members of ASE are nice and welcoming and mentoring, and the staff is wonderful. And so I was encouraged all along the way. Why don't you think about being program chair? Why don't you think about being this? Why don't you do this? Why don't you run for president? And it's really been...
And the society's been better for that. I mean that seriously.
Absolutely.
It's been better for you being actively involved like that.
Oh, thank you.
It is interesting that it is a very unique organization based upon really encouragement. It's tough. People can be tough, but encouragement, getting people, being friends with people,
right,
and being interested in them as people, and you know, we've had a career, and you know this, just bringing out white males, but we've always had sonographers who
right,
historically early were women, and played a key role in the development of this field.
And when I was president, there had been a few women presidents before me, but not that many. And I think the sonographers were especially supportive of having a woman. And so I viewed one of my roles as president in supporting sonographer leadership and finding pathways for sonographers to be chairs. And I'm on the committee that's trying to look at sonographer leadership and what is necessary to bring more sonographer leaders into the ASE.
That's great. You were the 26th president
Yep.
of this society. What were, looking back on it, what were some of the major issues or major accomplishments that you were proud of during that period of time?
Well, we formed a lot of collaborations with other cardiac societies. One of our big cardiology societies published an appropriate use criteria paper that said that transesophageal echo was rarely appropriate for the diagnosis of aortic dissection. And we refused to sign off on it, and that created quite a stir. It took really a lot of time. But I was adamant that it's ridiculous, we're not doing that. And we joined with several other groups that also felt that they had been, that their modalities were misunderstood. And so that was a lot. I also spent a lot of time on education. I was involved in the review course for years and years. And I remember the first time I gave a lecture, Jerry Orajemi, who was the course director, who's the only person since college who calls me Wiggy, called me and said, "Wiggy, can you put together a talk on the normal echo?" And as I remember, he gave me 2 weeks to do it. And maybe I'm being unkind, maybe it was 3. But I put together this talk, and it was, of course, the first talk, so it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and but the meeting was in Philadelphia, and it was very well received. And I then was on the ASE review course forever, was the director for years. And that's how I've met a lot of younger ASE members. I was once on a plane sitting next to a young guy, and I said something to the stewardess, and he said, "Are you Susan Wiegers?" And I said, "Yeah, how do you know?" And he said, "I recognize your voice."
Isn't that great? That's great. Well, I mean, both those examples are fabulous, and they, show the power of the ASE and the power of doing exactly what you're doing, make the field better and make people better in it. Susan, what's going to be, or can I call you Wiggy?
No, you may not.
I may not. So what's going to, put your future cap on, even though you've had a long career and made tremendous contribution. Where are we going in the next 5 to 10 years with echo?
Well, I was told that my Edler lecture was a little controversial, and what I said many years ago now was that the horse was out of the barn, point-of-care ultrasound was here to stay, and we should embrace it and really work with people who weren't cardiologists. As a side note, I remember when I first got involved in ASE, there was some controversy about whether anesthesiologists were capable of doing TEEs. And there was a camp in ASE who thought that is not appropriate. I think saner heads prevailed, and it's enriched the society to have critical care, anesthesia, and a number of other groups. But critical care, I think, is essential. And now internal medicine, and the other thing I said is that artificial intelligence already could read echoes when I gave my Edler lecture. It just hadn't been, I think the companies were introducing it very gently because they were afraid of scaring the society and the cardiologists. But I think that's inevitable, and I think we should embrace it and study it.
Interesting points. I mean, point of care ultrasound with miniaturization has the capabilities to go where it's really needed, underserved populations, and having AI can play a role in that. So you were far ahead of your time there. And I've been involved in a lot of the pushbacks for anesthesia, point of care, critical care.
Neil Weissman and I went to the cardiac ultrasound and medical education meeting when he was immediate past president and I was president. And so we're at the reception, we're working the room, and I say, "Hi, I'm Susan Wiegers, I'm president of the American Society of Echo." And somebody said to me, "What are you doing here?" Like, because we had a reputation for opposing use, and I think that's one of the things I was proudest of in my presidency, was that we kind of started to change the paradigm that, you know, we're not a trade union. We don't own ECHO. We are educators.
And you're trying to make sure that the quality wherever it's done is up to speed, and I think that's great. So you've had an incredible career, still have an incredible career. Any noteworthy memories to share? And I'm thinking about events, people, experiences. You've already alluded to some. I'm sure there are a lot at Mass General with Ned and company.
Well, no, we don't need to discuss those.
But sort of memories, you know, noteworthy memories about events, people, or experiences.
Well, one of the most important things that happened to me in terms of my career was when I was junior faculty, I got recruited to Penn, and Nat Rychek was the head of the lab, immediately left and told me that it was nothing personal. He went to Allegheny. So I was interim director of Penn for 9 months until Martin St. John Sutton came. And he became a very good friend and a very important mentor to me. He's just a lovely, lovely person. Unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. And he also had a crazy sense of humor. So it was fun to go to work. It was fun to try to figure out what he was saying, because he could famously mumble. And so that was very important. And when I was president, I got to give him the Meritorious Service Award, and that was, or Lifetime Achievement Award, and that was important to me.
No, it's it. No, he was something else. He really. So it's really, you're telling me about events that centered around people who made a difference. Is that correct? That's really what, and that's really what ECHO and ASE has been, I think.
Yeah, and you know, ASE has been a huge support to me. I was ill. People in ASE reached out, told me I had the same thing, you'll get better. It was really remarkable. And the ASE has always been supportive, both the staff and my friends, and supportive of work-life balance decisions. And they're people that I can talk things over with about what I should do. My very last academic job, I was CEO and president of the Temple Faculty Practice Plan. And a couple of people said to me, "Are you sure you're going to like that?" And perhaps I should have listened more closely, but I think my experience was really colored by COVID. It was just a disaster. Hard to make any money in practice during COVID.
Right. Well, but your experience as a leader was important to that organization and at that period of time. Susan, you've been a tremendous shining light in this society and in the field, and I mean that sincerely, so thank you for visiting with us.
Thanks very much for having me.